Well, I think let's examine COPE from where it comes from, and let's look at some of the leaders which are instrumental in the formation of COPE. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the collective experience of those people, particularly in political organization pre-1994, with high degrees of legitimacy and credibility, at the same time accumulated 10 to 15 years of experience in executive government and in lawmaking. So clearly there is a deep understanding, I think, among some leaders of the party of the way in which politics is organized, not just as cooperation and consensus, but also as conflict and politics as contestation. At the same time, there is a keen understanding, I suspect, of the governance regime, of oversight, of accountability, of lawmaking, and of the processes and procedures in democratic institutions, not just representative, but executive as well. And so what we can expect is that they would use and exploit some of the procedural dimensions of our democracy to score political points. So I think the contestation between the ANC and COPE, even though the ANC might feel ascendant after its sterling performance in the election, we can expect some degree of contestation to continue, but also degrees of demonization and attempts at delegitimization. So I think we should expect that that's going to happen. Despite the favorable odds that COPE enjoys in terms of the accumulated experience, both organizational, political, and in terms of the executive and in terms of governance of some of its leaders, they have been beset, I think, with internal fracture, with organizational problems. Now, of course, by the time they contested the election, they were roughly about 110 days old as a political party. So no real organizational structures in place, no branch structure, not having had a congress yet, no formal decision-making processes. So none of the hierarchical organizational aspects of what we expect a political party to have was in place. Yet they managed to pool around 7.5% of the vote, which translates into 30 seats. Now I think that is substantial for its presence in a democratic representative institution at the national level, and as a official opposition party in about 4 of the provinces, with at least some showing in some of the others. So that presence is going to help. The provincial level, I think the number of seats that they actually have is far too small for them to be as effective as they might be at national level. Now, ultimately, of course, their performance at the national level in parliament is going to depend on who they actually place in parliament. At the moment, there's some contestation in the party about whether Mosiwa Lekota actually goes to parliament or not, and whether they send Mvume Dandala as the leader of the parliamentary party. If that's the case, of course, Dandala goes in without any experience of parliament, whereas Lekota goes in with experience of parliament as a legislator, as chair of the National Council of Provinces, but also as a member of the executive, as a Minister of Defence. So he knows both sides of the governance divide, and so could potentially play a more important strategic role in Parliament. At the same time, they also have to bother about what kind of strong leadership they require in the party to build the party outside the parliamentary party. So it's a tough toss-up. Of course, it didn't help that I think they sent messages which were mixed about their policies, about where they stand on certain critical issues with respect to black economic empowerment, affirmative action, and then the proposals they've made about changes to the electoral system. Not only are they calling for a mixed electoral system, they're also calling for a direct election of the president and of premiers and of mayors. And I'm not sure that they've actually carefully thought about this proposal of direct election. While on the one hand, it does make leaders more accountable to a public, we've seen evidence, not just in Africa, but internationally too. For instance, the US under George Bush, for instance, Zimbabwe, just north of our border with Robert Mugabe, Uganda, where direct elections of presidents have actually been tantamount to creating presidential monarchs who are very difficult to dislodge, firstly from power, and secondly very difficult to actually hold to account, and therefore take license for determining policy and political trajectories which are completely out of sync with what a society actually wants. So I think that in part has been their undoing, but this is a critical moment for COPE. And it's a critical moment not just because they've got 30 seats and they performed better than some people might have expected. But surely it's a critical moment because they have to sort the internal house in order, not just organizationally, but politically and in terms of policy as well, because the contradictory mixed messages that they sent were certainly not helpful. And it's an indication, I suspect, of the kind of contestation over policy and over politics that's happening within COPE. That is not great for an emergent party. It is healthy for internal democracy in the party, but it's certainly not going to substantially increase the fortunes of the party, not in the short run, and not before they can get an organizational branch, procedural, political structure in place.